Hey everyone, I'm here with Shane from the MIGRO YouTube channel, and today I wanted to discuss with you a topic that gets brought up from time to time, usually from the more experienced growers, and that's supplemental and side lighting. I know supplemental can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. Generally, it means just increasing the brightness of your grow area, but there's also the aspect of adding in additional types of lighting, additional wavelengths of lighting. So, did you want to talk a little bit first about increasing the brightness or sort of covering the canopy evenly with light?
Yeah, so I think the root of it is what people are trying to achieve is to maximize the yield potential from the grow area that they have. Um, when it comes to side lighting, for example, I have never seen and I've never done any testing myself to determine whether it is efficient or effective as opposed to top lighting. I don't see why it would be any less efficient in the sense that I don't know that the plant really cares what direction the photons are coming in, as long as they pass onto the surface of the leaf where photosynthesis occurs. I don't think the plant is going to be concerned, as I said, from what direction the light is coming from. Um, Having said that, I think the plant, I think the first thing I would usually ask somebody if they're considering that is have they maximized their sort of standard top lighting options, and are they getting have they optimized or maximized the light intensity there? And I would say very rarely is that the case. So usually I just advise just add some standard lights, put them on top, or increase, or put some additional lighting rather than supplementary lighting, just additional lighting, increase the wattage of whatever system you're using. But when it does come to side lighting, if you have maximized that, and that would be bringing it up to about 1,000 micromoles uh, average power intensity on the top canopy. That's a very high level. That would be, to achieve that, you would need to be putting in somewhere in the order of about 600 watts of high efficiency LED in a 4x4, for example. Or 1,000 watts of LED in a 5x5. It's a very high level of lighting. So that's the first question. When it comes to the side lighting then, if you have done that and you're trying to squeeze a little bit more out of the area, again, the first question I'd ask is, can you just generate more area and increase the physical size? And I'm saying that because it's simpler to do that. It's simpler just to top light and let the canopy maximize and spread out and fill the area. You start get to side lighting and you're actually taking away grow area at the side if you think about it, because you've got to put a light down the side of the canopy and have some distance between that light and the plant, the wall of plant at the side of leaves at the side, in which case you're taking from one thing and you're giving it to another. It doesn't really mean the total of your plant size will be any bigger. Just let the plants grow wider or grow out to a larger area, and again, light from the top. And again, the reasons are just simple. Your lighting generates heat. It's usually designed to be hung vertically over something, just in terms of its arrangement and setup and the way it cools and fins and all that stuff. So generally, I would go for maximize your top lighting. If you're absolutely determined to put lighting down the side, then why not add it down the side? You're going to get an increase in growth. The canopy is going to reach out, I would expect, and certainly develop more, or the plants are on that side. And you should get more growth, more buds, all that stuff on that side. So don't have any huge disagreement with it in principle, but I would think that it's probably wise to look at maximizing your other options before going to that.
Okay. And what about different wavelengths? I know for different scenarios. For example, during the vegetative stage, people recommend a more bluish wavelength, while in the flowering stage, people recommend red. And now there's been research done for things such as far red, infrared, as well as the other side, UV. Do you want to go over sort of, is it possible to go piece by piece?
Yeah, so I'm going to separate out plant growth and plant development. Plant growth is the quantity of plant that you'll get. Plant development is what shape and size will that plant be when it develops. Spectrum, the power spectrum, which is same as the visual spectrum, it goes from deep blue at 400 nanometers wavelength up to 700 nanometers and deep red. That range is called the power range because it's photosynthetically active, i.e., it makes plants grow. It causes photosynthesis and it makes plants grow. Within that deep blue to deep red, there is slight variance in the effectiveness of different spectrum. So red is the most photosynthetically efficient. Blue is the least photosynthetically efficient. Green is somewhere in the middle. But all of them will contribute to yield, to plant growth. The ratio, so let's say red is 100% efficient. It's not, but it's let's call it 1. Green and blue would be about 80% efficient. This is in laboratory tests. But there are, in theory, then you would only provide a red light, but there would be problems with that, and this is where we get into plant development. Different wavelengths have different effects on plant growth. Green is fairly neutral. It's like the way it's often described is like bulk. It's something that you add in as bulk to the light spectrum. It's helpful because it along with the red and the blue, it creates white light, which means we can see the plant clearly. We can see the plant growth. We can see problems with the plant, all that kind of stuff. So that's useful. Green also, if it has an attribute, really, it's penetration into the canopy, which we won't go into now. I've done some videos on it. Basically, the green light does get reflected off the leaves, but it also passes through the leaves and it bounces around and it gets down further into the leaf and into the plant and the other light spectrum. Red is excellent, and really you want as much as possible, which is why a lot of grow lights now have additional red LEDs on the boards. So they're high efficiency electrically and also highly efficient from a photosynthetic point of view. So more red is good. But it's a recipe, and we need a mix of these things in order to have a good light overall. And for this blue, although it is one of the, it's much less photosynthetically effective than, or efficient, I should say, than red. It's very important for plant development. It affects plant height by affecting internodal distance. That's the distance between the branching on plants. And so you need about 5% minimum blue light in order to regulate that plant growth, to keep it short and dense. In old school terms, high pressure sodium is only about 2 or 3% blue. Didn't have enough blue to regulate plant growth, and therefore resulted in plant stretching. And that's why typically in the past people used less efficient metal halide bulbs in veg and switched over to the more electrically efficient HPS bulbs in flower. Was because you kept your plants short for the less energy demanding veg phase, and kept them short and tight so that when you did switch over, the plants would be short and dense to start with, and therefore in ultimate development where they were going would stay reasonably short and dense. But you would always see that stretch occurring when you switched over. So these days we've got LEDs where we can vary the recipe of that ratios of blue to green to red by choosing different color, temperature, white LEDs. and then adding in supplementary LEDs into them. As it happens, sort of neutral white has about between 10 and 15% blue light, which is a really good level for keeping the plants short and dense. It has, in balance, has about 40% green and about 40%, 40 to 45% green and 40 to 45% red in the spectrum. And that's kind of ideal. It just so happens what is generally available in the commercial market for normal human lighting is also very suitable in terms of a light recipe for plant growth. So that's the power spectrum. That's the mixture. We want a bit of blue in it, and we want a bit of green in it, and as much red as possible. And as I said, neutral to warm white LEDs tend to provide that recipe, and generally people are happy with it. And if you look at the spectrum provided by almost all LED manufacturers that I've tested, who provide white LEDs that I would have tested in the last 2 or 3 years, are providing that spectrum, and everybody seems pretty happy with it. I'm not seeing any evidence that going off in any particular direction to a strong degree is really beneficial.
Okay. Well, so let's say somebody has a normal light that's great for the vegetative stage, but then they need a little boost in the flowering stage. Would you recommend them to include more full spectrum lighting then to sort of cover up
Yeah,
for that?
I'm pretty much saying that for all plant development, from seedling to harvest, if you have a neutral white light, somewhere in the neutral to warm white, it means when you look at it, it's not too orangey or it's not too bluey. It just looks like a neutral white light to us. That will be fine the whole way through. You need nothing else. And just try and ignore all the marketing BS that goes on, and just be happy with your light and stop trying to mess with something that's perfectly good. We want to look, I don't know if it's a particular growers thing, or it's a very male dominated area and men are particularly interested in looking for angles and technical whiz bangery, and we want to look for some sort of secret sauce or some sort of magic or some sort of edge. And I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. You don't, but on the plus side is you also can just relax and just switch on your lights and go, I'm providing the best light needed for my plants. Now, I didn't go into far red and ultraviolet for a reason, because I want to just put people at ease who are listening and watching. You've got all you need. There is an argument for far red, but far red is when you go beyond the 700 nanometers. It is somewhat photosynthetically efficient, but not anywhere near red in the visible spectrum. So if you add it, you'd be much better adding more white light than adding more far red in terms of your yield, producing more growth. There is information out there that says that far red sort of increases the efficiency of the rest of the light you're using. People misuse the term Emerson effect and other things. It's BS again. The only evidence I've seen is that if you add too much far red, you get more plant stretching. So far red in itself is okay to have a small amount, over 3 or 4%, which is, by the way, normally present in regular LEDs. Regular white lights will have a little bit of far red at the end of the spectrum. You put in more than that, and you're going to promote plant stretching. So you're actually having a negative effect on your plant development by adding too much far red. So just don't do it. If you want more growth, add more white light. Add it in the power spectrum. We all know that works. The other stuff is speculative, and in my view, can only have a negative effect if you add too much. In terms of UV, I sell UV bulbs, so be warned in advance that I'm biased, if you want to call it that, in this regard. LED manufacturers add UVA LEDs. In my view, UVA LEDs they're expensive, they burn out very quickly, and they don't provide very much UVA photons. they are slightly photosynthetic, but they won't really do anything in that the benefit people are looking for, which is increased potency by using UV, is associated with UVB photons, which it is not possible to generate with LEDs. So no point in them getting them little LEDs on your light with UV, and are only really feasible using fluorescent tubes. And that's only used in the last 2 or 3 weeks of flowering for a short time, just to stimulate the plant response. They're not left on all the time. Using UVB will actually slow down growth. And so you don't want to use it in the high growth phase. You're just triggering a plant response. You're triggering a particular responder on the plants. And it's sort of commonly known as like the sunburn reflex, or the sunscreen reflex, where it goes and produces oils to protect itself from the UVB photons. And those oils have all the things that we want to increase potency. So that's the relationship between UV and plant development.
So basically, we want to increase the lighting as much as we can, full spectrum, because that's the most balanced. And for flowering, UV does help in the final 2 weeks of flowering, but
It's not
otherwise,
for growth, it's for potency. It's for how high the concentration of cannabinoids will be. So you get a increased smell basically, and you get an increased potency. It varies by strain, so I can't tell you by how much for everybody. But I have worked with growers, and I'm working with Dutch Passion now at the moment, actually, to experiment with them on their high potency strains to see what sort of effect it can have. But I haven't got definitive results that I can share publicly, because they're not. I haven't got done strict, proper controlled A and B testing of the same genetic material with the same setups and all that stuff, and a sufficient number of samples of each grow to give you a good idea of what the overall increase is. I have videos on my YouTube channel where I visited a CBD producer in the UK who was experimenting with UVB and was getting up to 40% increase in CBD in their strains. So it is, and that's industrially tested and verified. So there certainly is potential, but in some of the strains they saw very little improvement. So it depends on the strain. It's strain dependent, and also dose dependent. And I don't know all these things, so I'm not going to pretend to you that I do. Other than to say the general advice is 2 to 3 hours, a relatively low dose in the last 3 weeks of flowering can have a significant effect, and it's a fairly low cost in terms of that supplement light. So it's like $70 for a fitting, for 20-watt fitting, and given the potential of what it can do to increase. And I've been selling them now for about 3 months, and I've had anecdotal evidence from pretty experienced growers now at this stage, where they've been working with the same genetic material, so the same strains and the same clones over and over again, and they've seen a marked increase. Not always they can't tell me in THC because they're not getting it independently tested and numbers of samples and all that, but they can tell literally when they're harvesting, because the amount of resin on the gloves, and so that's simple and straightforward evidence that they're getting higher levels, certainly of terpenes and flavonoids, because they're produced in the oils. And you could make the leap then that would be increase in THC also. But as I say, I don't have evidence that I can stand by of that yet.
okay. Well, I think we've covered the topic pretty well. And before we go, can you let our viewers know where they can find you?
Oh yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, so the YouTube channel is MIGRO, MIGRO, and Same on Instagram, hashtag MIGROLight, MIGROLIGHT, and you'll find us pretty quickly across YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And then we have our own website and our own website shop. We sell our own lights at www.migrolight.com.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Shane, and I'll talk to you soon.
A real pleasure. Thank you.